You're streaming with the Fantasy Follow. Welcome to TFF Live. It's week 2 of fantasy football. Thanks for streaming with us. Let's get right into it. Our chat is open, so please join the conversation or leave your comments below as we get you ready for your week 2 fantasy matchups. On today's show, we got a week 1 recap from last week's play. We got some player updates from around the league. Our actives and inactives are out. And we got our week 2 starts and sits. But let's start with a look back at week 1, where the big story was the injuries suffered by big-name fantasy players in their first game of the season. Now, if you survived any of these injuries in your first week matchups, well done. Michael Thomas from the New Orleans Saints, George Kittle from the 49ers, Le'Veon Bell from the New York Jets, and James Conner from Pittsburgh all left their first week games, and only Conner is expected to be on the field this week. Thomas, Kittle, and Bell will all be missing their second games of the season. Michael Thomas in New Orleans, he left the game late versus Tampa Bay with a high ankle sprain. Now, Thomas had played in 57 straight games, but he will now be out for tomorrow night's game against the Raiders, and he will likely miss more games. You'll probably expect a bump in work for Emmanuel Sanders, and I would also expect a nice game out of tight end Jared Cook in Thomas's absence. Now, Cook talked about Thomas's presence on the Saints team.
His presence is huge. I mean, you got the number 1 receiver in the league, and defenses have to pay attention to that. They have to take that into account. That's what they prepare for all week. So when we go into the game, a lot of times we don't even know what type of coverage Mike is going to draw or how they're going to play him. But that also leaves an opportunity for us to be able to go out there and shine because of the attention that Mike does draw. So, you know, him being the best receiver, that just helps everybody else out. And not only that, but, you know, his intensity and his route running, everything that he brings to the game, it's like having another giant on the backside of everything.
San Francisco's George Kittle, widely considered one of the top 2 tight ends in fantasy. He was hurt in their loss last week to the Arizona Cardinals. Now, it was reported that he was suffering from a sprained knee, but NFL Network's Ian Rappaport this morning, he's reported that he's also dealing with a bone bruise, and this could very likely be a 2-week absence for Kittle. Now, Kittle had hoped to play this week, and earlier on in the week on Tuesday, Coach Kyle Shanahan had reported on his progress.
Kittle, he's battling. We thought it'd be all right. Woke up the next day a little sore. He fully expects to be there Sunday, like he always does, and just like he always plays through the game when it happens. But we'll give him the whole week. Always love to give him out there on Friday. We'll see how that goes. But Friday's just a walkthrough anyways. But Kittle is one guy that he's ready to go on Sunday, and the doctors say he's good to go. We have no problem with him going without practicing.
Now, Kittle was not able to work through that injury this week, so he will be out for a 1 p.m. game against the Jets. And speaking of the Jets, it was Le'Veon Bell who left the game in his week 1 matchup against the Bills with a hamstring injury. Now, the Jets placed him on injured reserve, so he will miss at least 3 weeks, and you can expect backup Frank Gore to get a good chunk of the work in Bell's absence. In Pittsburgh, it's James Conner who left game 1 with an ankle injury Monday night against the Giants. Now, Benny Snell came in and played excellent in his absence, 113 yards on 19 carries. Conner is expected to play today, but what role will he see and what role will Snell have now in this offense? Now, Ian Rappaport has reported this morning that Conner and Snell, they will likely split carries today at home against Denver. And taking a look at last week's recap, your week 1 top fantasy scorers. We'll start out with the quarterbacks. It was Russell Wilson with a great game against the Atlanta Falcons. 31.78 fantasy points, 4 touchdowns, 322 yards passing, and added 29 yards on the ground. Wilson and the Seahawks, they get a Sunday night game tonight on NBC against the Patriots. Aaron Rodgers was second with 30.76 fantasy points against the Vikings, 4 touchdowns, 364 yards passing. Josh Allen with 28.18 fantasy points in a win over the Jets, 2 touchdowns, 312 yards passing. It was his first career 300-yard passing game. He also added 1 rushing touchdown and 57 yards on the ground. Lamar Jackson with 27.50 points in a rout over Cleveland, 3 touchdowns and 275 yards through the air, and he added 45 yards rushing. And Kyler Murray, 27.30 fantasy points in a win over the 49ers, 1 touchdown, 230 yards passing. He also added a rushing touchdown and 91 yards on the ground, which was actually the most of any Cardinals rusher. Your top wide receiver scorers from last week. Davante Adams had a huge game against the Minnesota Vikings. 41.60 fantasy points, 156 yards with 2 touchdowns and 14 catches. The Packers are home to Detroit today at 1 p.m. Calvin Ridley was second with 33.90 fantasy points in a loss to the Seahawks. 130 yards with 2 touchdowns and 9 receptions. It was Adam Thielen in third with 31.00 fantasy points versus Green Bay in a loss. He had 110 yards with 2 touchdowns on 6 catches. DeAndre Hopkins with a great game in a win over San Francisco, 29.10 fantasy points, 151 yards. He didn't catch a touchdown, but he only caught 14 balls. And in fifth, Darius Slayton for the Giants against Pittsburgh, 102 yards, 2 touchdowns on 6 catches. The top running back scorers last week, it was Josh Jacobs from the Raiders, 35.90 fantasy points against Carolina, 93 yards and 3 touchdowns, adding 4 catches for 46 yards. The Raiders will open up the Las Vegas Stadium tomorrow night against the New Orleans Saints, so that'll be a great one. In second, you might have heard of Christian McCaffrey, 28.50 fantasy points in a loss to the Raiders, 97 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, adding 3 catches and 38 yards. Zeke Elliott in third with 27.70 fantasy points against the Rams in a loss, 96 yards and 1 touchdown on the ground, catching 3 balls for 31 yards and a touchdown. In fourth, Nyheim Hines, 27.30 fantasy points against Jacksonville in a loss, 28 yards on the ground with a touchdown, and a big 8 catches, 45 yards, and a touchdown through the air. He, of course, came in and got a lot more work when the Colts lost to Marlon Mack, and he's a player to watch this week. In fifth, Malcolm Brown for the Rams against Dallas, 26.00 fantasy points, 79 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground, adding 3 catches for 31 yards. Top scoring tight ends from last week, it was Dallas Goedert, 24.10 fantasy points in a loss to Washington, 101 yards, 8 catches, and a touchdown. What do you do with him this week? What do you do as a Zach Ertz owner with Dallas Goedert? This is going to be an interesting one to watch. Mark Andrews in second, 22.80 fantasy points against Cleveland, 58 yards, 5 catches, 2 touchdowns. A possible breakout year for Noah Fant from the Denver Broncos. 19.10 fantasy points in a loss to the Titans. 81 yards, 5 catches, 1 touchdown. Some guy named Travis Kelce in fourth. 17.00 fantasy points versus Houston. That was a Thursday night game. 50 yards, 6 catches, and 1 touchdown. And from the Lions, in fifth, it was TJ Hawkinson in his second year. 16.60 fantasy points in a loss against the Bears, 56 yards, 5 catches, 1 touchdown. Let's take you around the league now and get you some of the other player updates for week 2 in fantasy football, starting out in Philadelphia.
With Miles Sanders and Derek Barnett, do you expect a full load for them this week against the Rams? Will you ease them in? What's your outlook?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. With both of those players, obviously today's a big day, for both of them. Hopefully to get through a Friday practice, and then again we'll see how they bounce back, tomorrow and then of course Sunday morning. So I'm optimistic that both guys will be available for the game Sunday. Yes.
On Cortland, is that a situation where you would take him out on the field that morning and see how he is, or will you make the call before that?
Possibly. I haven't been able to talk to him yet since practice has been over, but I think it's a 50-50 thing. We're going to see how he feels, as he did more on it today, see how he feels when he comes in tomorrow and make a decision. And it could go to a pregame warm-up.
He's a young player, and I think that's the biggest thing, like as a rookie, you don't want to overwork those guys or put them in too much of a situation early. I think that, his role will continue to grow. Again, we got 2 other backs, and, the way the snaps went, it's all, with Peyton, we fished the game in a 4-minute situation where, we basically ran the ball to use the clock at the end. And that's why his snap count was so high. We also had a lot of red zone runs, which we felt good about and Peyton was able to, get it in the end zone twice, which is good. So, based on how the games play themselves out, that'll dictate a lot of the snaps. But Antonio's a guy that's, his game, it's only going to grow and grow with the more experience he has. And just, I think, being able to, he got that first game under his belt. He got tackled, had a couple runs, understanding the speed of the game. I think his comfort level will just increase.
It's awesome to get game reps. And I know he saw, 8 targets, or 9 targets, 8 catches, whatever it was. And did a good job of getting open and catching the ball and making some plays. And I threw him 1 ball at 2 yards, and he made a few guys miss and got to 8 or 9. So he's a guy that we want the ball in his hands. He's very explosive. And, on top of that, he works his tail off in practice. And the communication's there. The drive to be great is there. And I expect that chemistry to continue to grow, especially as we keep moving forward with these games as we move along in the season.
Up next, the actives and inactives are out for the 1 p.m. games. But first, we'll tell you that you can catch this show, TFF Live Sunday Pregame, every Sunday at 12 noon, taking you right up till game time to get you ready for your fantasy matchups. All right, actives and inactives are out for today's 1 p.m. games. Let's run through them. And we do not have our typical graphics today, so you're going to be looking at me while I run through these players with you. But we'll go through all the games, and we'll make sure that you know all the players that are not playing so you can get them out of your lineups. Starting with the New York Giants at the Chicago Bears. No fantasy relevant players for the Giants on the inactive list. So that means Golden Tate must be available for this game. He was one player that was questionable, and he is not on the inactive list. Chicago Bears at home. Nobody to speak of there. Should be a full roster for the Bears. Next game is the Atlanta Falcons at the Dallas Cowboys. This should be a shootout. Looking at Atlanta, we have nobody of consequence listed there. And looking at Dallas, same thing. So nothing to see here. And expect a lot of points in that game. Detroit at Green Bay. I expect this game to be a shootout as well. Let's take a look. Detroit. Kenny Golladay, of course, is out. He was announced as out earlier in the week. He's been dealing with a hamstring. Very possible that this won't be the end of him being out. We may not see him next week either. Love to get him back soon, as I have him on a couple of teams. I'm sure you guys do as well. Green Bay. Well, Jordan Love is out, so it looks like Aaron Rodgers might play today. But other than that, nothing of consequence. We will probably see another big passing game out of Rodgers and Devontae Adams, so get them locked and loaded in your lineups. Jacksonville at Tennessee. Jacksonville again, Dede Westbrook out this week. He was out last week as well. Probably not of huge consequence in your lineups unless you're in a deeper league. Let's see. What do we have for Tennessee? A.J. Brown, of course, is out. Bone bruise for him. They're talking multiple weeks. We saw a big game from Corey Davis last week. We would probably expect for him to get a lot of work again this week. Jonnu Smith, same deal, tight end there for the Titans. A possible, player you might be able to plug in case you might have lost, say, George Kittle this week. No other big names lost there for the Titans. Jeff Swaim, tight end for the Titans. Not sure how much playing time he's been getting, but if for any reason he was impacting Smith, all the more reason to get him into your lineup as a tight end this week. Minnesota at Indianapolis. I expect Phil Rivers to have a big day today against the Vikings. They've struggled this year with a young secondary. Let's take a look at their actives and inactives for Minnesota first. Nobody of consequence fantasy-wise for Minnesota. For Indianapolis, of course, Marlon Mack. Season-ending Achilles last week. Jonathan Taylor named a starter by Frank Reich. Get him into your lineup. They're expecting big things. Nyheim Hines will probably return some flex value as well today. Tight end Jack Doyle out for the Colts. Nobody else really of consequence listed for that team. Buffalo Bills at Miami. I've heard some experts today predicting a Miami win. We don't like that. We're Bills Mafia here. Out for the Bills, TJ Yeldon was out last week as well. No real fantasy consequence there. And quarterback Jake Fromm is not playing, so it looks like Josh Allen may be their starter this week. The Miami Dolphins. Who knows with this team what's going on? We have nobody listed as out, although apparently last week Jordan Howard and Matt Breida were both in, but may as well have been out because those were the two we would have expected to get some fantasy run, and we saw nothing. Interestingly, Devontae Parker not listed. He was questionable with a hamstring. He is a player that I would have extreme concern with today if you're planning to start him. He got injured mid-game last week. He's been riddled with injuries in his career. You would expect Miami to be throwing, probably trailing for some of this game. So you would think that's a good situation, but perhaps Preston Williams is a better choice in their receiver core. We'll see what happens there. San Francisco at the Jets. Well, we know George Kittle is out. We don't really see anyone else listed there for the 49ers, so they should be in good shape. I would expect a solid run game from them. Perhaps Brandon Ayuk gets involved his first week as a wide receiver for the 49ers. We'll see what happens there. At the Jets, we know Le'Veon Bell is out. We know Jamison Crowder is out. Let's see what else we got. No other players listed on the inactive list of consequence there. So we will see what happens in that game. I would expect that to be a big run game for San Fran. We do know Richard Sherman is out there in their secondary. Don't know if that will make any difference for the Jets. I don't know that I could possibly see myself starting anybody on that team for the Flying Adam Gases. LA Rams at Philadelphia. For Los Angeles, nobody of consequence listed. For Philadelphia, of course, Alshon Jeffrey still out. Nobody else listed as inactive of consequence. That means Jalen Reagor, again, is in your lineup, still working through his shoulder injury. I'm going to be really interested in this game to see what happens at the tight end spot. It was sounding like Jalen Ramsey might be covering Zach Ertz today some, so perhaps Dallas Goedert is a good start. We'll see what happens there. I happen to have Ertz and Goddard both in one of my leagues, and I have no idea who to start. And I have some time left to make that decision still, but who knows? We'll see what happens. Denver at Pittsburgh. Philip Lindsay, we know, is out. No real other players of consequence there. It should be Melvin Gordon's backfield today. We'll probably see Royce Freeman some, but I expect Gordon to have a good day based on his volume. He will be on my start list once we go through our starts and sits coming up next. Even though Pittsburgh's defense has been great, I think Gordon will get enough of the volume today to be effective. Pittsburgh. Nobody of consequence listed, and that means James Conner, no setbacks. A big question mark, however. Benny Snell with his great game in week 1. How do they handle this situation? Pittsburgh is typically a team Mike Tomlin usually likes to run with a bell cow. That's kind of what made Conner so valuable in drafts this year, in my opinion. And now it sounds like they may work them both in. So what do you do if you have Conner and you picked up Snell during the week when Conner was injured? Tough decisions there. We'll see what happens. Carolina at Tampa Bay, or as I've commonly heard called now, Tampa Bay with Tom Brady. Carolina struggled last week. We don't see anybody on their list inactive-wise. We'll see what the Bucs can do with that team. For Tampa, of course, Chris Godwin is out, concussion protocol. Mike Evans should be back in the fold. He is not listed. Scotty Miller, a popular pickup off the waiver wire, seems to be a favorite of Tom Brady out of the pass catchers. A lot of wondering about what's going to happen to the tight end spot, and perhaps you will see Rob Gronkowski on one of my start and sit lists coming up next, perhaps. Late games today, 4:05, we've got Washington FTs at Arizona. Kansas City and the LA Chargers. That's a 4:25 start. 4:25 Baltimore at Houston. Duke Johnson may have been questionable for Houston. Brandon Cook's questionable. Not sure if either one of those players will be plugged in your lineup right now, but something to keep an eye on. Baltimore, another week to see what they do with their running back. Mark Ingram, J.K. Dobbins, rotation-wise. The night game on NBC tonight is the Patriots at Seattle. I think this is a tough one for the Seattle wide receivers. I'm not sure what we're going to see out of New England other than Cam Newton. I expect another big game. There's been some talk that the first game rushing from Cam Newton was New England's attempt to let other teams know that he can still do it on the ground, but that they expect him to pass much more. I don't know if I believe that. I think Cam's fallback is going to be running the ball, and other than Julian Edelman, who are they throwing it to? Tomorrow night, the Monday night game is New Orleans at the Raiders. Of course, the big name is Michael Thomas. He will not be playing this week and likely afterwards. I doubt he will play afterwards. I would love it if he did, and I'm sure you would also if you have him as your number 1 draft pick this year. Seattle, Russell Wilson. Well, I'm sorry, that's not Seattle. That was tonight's game. Las Vegas, Raiders. Darren Waller, I expect to have a big game tomorrow. And we'll see if Henry Ruggs, who has been questionable, we'll see if he plays. And I like Jared Cook for the Saints. That's all the games. Let's get a little promo up here for you. Let you know how you can find out where we're at. It's the Fantasy Follow. Check out our YouTube channel. You're with us on YouTube right now. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to click the notification bell so you can find out when our new videos are out and get reminders when we're on our next TFF Live Sunday pregame show. Be sure to subscribe now. On Twitter, we are at the Fantasy Follow, and that is spelled THEFNTSYFOLLOW. Check us out there, and don't forget to submit your lineup questions on Twitter during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive so that we may answer your lineup questions on the air. Check us out on Facebook /The Fantasy Follow, and you can take a look at our website, www.thefantasyfollow.com. All right, let's go through our starts and sits for week 2. And just a little bit of word about the starts and sits. As we go through these, just remember, if you have Lamar Jackson or if you have Christian McCaffrey and you don't see their names on these lists, you're starting them. These lists, they're not intended for players who are automatic starts. If you've got those guys, they're in your lineup. These lists are for the players who you might have a decision. You might be on the fence. Do I want to play them? What do I think they're going to do this week? That's the purpose behind these lists. And don't forget, our chat is open, so please join us in the chat. If you have thoughts on any of these starts and sits, please add your thoughts, add your opinions. We want to share your opinions with everybody that's watching. You know, your thoughts may help that other fantasy player out there make a decision that helps them win their league this week. So let's get started. Starts and sits for week 2, and we'll start out at the quarterback spot. Our number 1 start is Cam Newton for the New England Patriots. Last week, Cam, 25.7 fantasy points, 75 yards rushing, and 2 touchdowns on the ground versus Miami. New England played Seattle, who last week allowed 24.9 fantasy points to Matt Ryan, along with 450 yards passing. So I think this is another good matchup for Cam Newton. If you have a choice on playing him or not, he should be in your lineup. The rest of our top 5, and we'll start from the bottom and work our way up. Number 5, Mitchell Trubisky against the New York Giants. In 2019, the New York Giants allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And last week, Ben Roethlisberger scored 22.06 points against them. Mitchell Trubisky, you can start him as a streamer. In 4th, Phillip Rivers against the Vikings. Last week, Aaron Rodgers torched the Vikings secondary along with Devontae Adams. 30.70 points, 364 yards, 4 touchdowns. The number 3 start is Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills. Playing the Miami Dolphins last week, Cam Newton, had a big game, 25.7 fantasy points, 75 yards rushing. Josh Allen, expect him to have some rushing upside today as well, along with perhaps one of their young running backs that we might talk about later. The second start is Aaron Rodgers. Today playing Detroit. Last year, Detroit allowed the 7th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Last week, Mitchell Trubisky, 24.28 points and 3 touchdowns against the Lions. So you can start Aaron Rodgers this week with confidence. And the top spot, as we said before, Cam Newton in a nice primetime matchup. The number 1 QB sit is Sam Darnold for the New York Jets. Today playing the San Francisco 49ers, who allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position last season. Darnold only scored 12.2 fantasy points last week versus Buffalo. You've got no Le'Veon Bell. You've got no Jamison Crowder. And you're playing San Francisco. Good luck. The rest of the top 5 quarterback sits for week 2. In 5th, Carson Wentz against the Rams. Last week, Wentz 2 interceptions, 8 sacks against Washington. Real problems on their offensive line, dealing with injuries. I really think this is a bad spot for Carson Wentz. Number 4 is Ryan Fitzpatrick against the Bills. In 2019, the Buffalo Bills allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position. The number 3 sit is Ryan Tannehill versus Jacksonville. Now in 2019, Derrick Henry for the Titans averaged 22.55 fantasy points against Jacksonville in 2 games. And last week, they allowed the most points to running backs. This sit is not so much a reflection on Tannehill as it is on game script. I believe this is going to be a big running game for Tennessee. I expect Tennessee to win this game, although Jacksonville was not expected to win last week, and they did. But I think this is a Derrick Henry game. Of course, Tennessee without A.J. Brown. Not that that is for sure going to work against Tannehill. He's still got players to throw to. Smith, Davis. Nonetheless, he's the 3rd sit. Number 2, Drew Lock at Pittsburgh. Well, they're playing Pittsburgh. That's not good. Last week, 2 interceptions, 3 sacks for Pittsburgh against the Giants. In 2019, they were the 4th fewest fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So that puts Drew Lock on the sit list. And number 1, as we said, for the Flying Adam Gases, Sam Darnold. Let's move on over to the wide receiver spot. Starts and sits for your week 2 fantasy matchups. Your top start is Adam Thielen for the Minnesota Vikings, playing at Indianapolis. Last season, the Colts allowed the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And this last week, Indy allowed 40.90 total fantasy points to wide receivers against Jacksonville, including 3 players to score 10 plus. Thielen with 110 yards and 2 touchdowns last week against Green Bay. Expect him to have another big game today. Get him in your lineup. The rest of the top 5 wide receiver starts, starting from 5th. I've got CeeDee Lamb against the Falcons in a high-scoring game, I expect. Last week, he had the 2nd most targets on the Cowboys and played 59 of 72 snaps for the rookie. Atlanta last week allowed 90-plus receiving yards to both Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. So if this game turns into a shootout, you're starting Amari Cooper. Perhaps the two guys that you might have a choice are Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb. I like CeeDee Lamb to have a big game in the second game of his career with the Cowboys. Number 4, Paris Campbell versus Minnesota. The Vikings got torched last week. 3 wide receivers over 18 points, including 156 yards and 2 touchdowns to Devontae Adams. Paris Campbell, the second receiver behind T.Y. Hilton on the Colts. I think that team will have a good day today. Campbell, a popular waiver wire pickup. He will be worth it if you went out and got him. The number 3 start is Emmanuel Sanders for the Saints against the Raiders. In 2019, the Raiders allowed the 14th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. No Michael Thomas in the lineup means much more work for Sanders. The number 2 start, again in the Atlanta-Dallas game, is Calvin Ridley. Last week, Ridley went for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns versus Seattle. I think this is a high-scoring game. I think there's plenty of work for Jones and Ridley and the rest of that team. Russell Gage caught a lot of balls last week. We didn't see a lot of Hayden Hurst, or Hayden Hurst Helmsley, perhaps you could call him. But we'll see what happens this week. Your number 1 wide receiver sit is Devontae Parker from the Miami Dolphins. Playing the Buffalo Bills, who last year allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. Parker will likely get a matchup with corner Tre'Davious White today, who allowed no touchdowns the entire 2019 season. And he's been banged up. This is a good week to put Devontae Parker on your bench. The rest of the top 5 wide receiver sits. Number 5, DJ Moore at Tampa Bay. Tampa with a much improved secondary. I just don't like this spot for Moore. He's certainly a player that could be in your lineup. Last week, the top 2 starters, Buccaneers allowed just 32 yards total. Number 4, sadly, DK Metcalf, as I have him on a few rosters. Against the Patriots, expect Metcalf to see Stephon Gilmore in coverage this week, last year's Defensive Player of the Year. That puts him firmly on this list. The number 3 sit is Deshaun Jackson versus the Rams. Last week, Jackson only saw 37 snaps for the Eagles. That was the fewest among all starters. Only had 2 catches. Coach Doug Peterson said that Jackson would work his way back into the lineup, but perhaps this is a good week to wait and see. Number 2, Christian Kirk versus the Washington FTs. Last week, Kirk, 1 catch, 0 yards versus San Francisco. His last 4 games, he has averaged 3.4 fantasy points per game. DeAndre Hopkins caught about 150 passes last week, and he'll probably catch that again this week. So that makes Christian Kirk your number 2 sit. And your top sit is Devontae Parker. Moving over to running backs. Starts and sits at the running back spot for week 2. Our top start, no surprise, is Jonathan Taylor versus the Vikings. Marlon Mack injured in week 1 with a season-ending Achilles injury. Last week, Taylor split touches with Nyheim Hines in the second half after Mack left. But Coach Frank Reich indicated that Taylor would be the new starter. So if you've got him on your team, you may have expected him sometime in the season to flash enough to take over that spot. And unfortunately, with the loss of Mack, he's moved right in already. He's your top start. The rest of the running back starts for week 2. Number 5, Zach Moss from the Buffalo Bills. In 2019, the Miami Dolphins allowed the 7th most points to the running back position. Last week, Miami allowed over 200 rushing yards to the New England Patriots. In addition, Moss last week was outsnapped by Devin Singletary 49-39, but he outtouched Singletary 14-12, including 4 inside the 5-yard line. So it does appear that the Bills are going to turn to Zach Moss for the important carries for your fantasy points. Against the Dolphins this week, a good chance the Bills are playing from ahead and running the ball. That makes Zach Moss your number 5 running back start. Number 4 is Malcolm Brown. Playing the Philadelphia Eagles, you saw what Brown did last week. 18 rushes, 2 touchdowns, 4 targets. Cam Akers was named the starter last week, and Malcolm Brown outtouched him. That may change somewhere down the road, but if you need a running back this week to plug into your lineup, I believe Malcolm Brown has a good shot at having another big game this week. The 3 spot is Melvin Gordon for the Denver Broncos at Pittsburgh. We talked about this before. Pittsburgh defense, very stingy. However, Philip Lindsay is not playing. Last week, Gordon outtouched Lindsay 18-8. Royce Freeman will likely fill in the backup spot. Gordon will likely get all the volume and all the important volume. I believe that makes him a start this week, despite playing Pittsburgh. Number 2, Raheem Mostert is a must start at the New York Jets. 19 of the 30 running back touches last week went to Mostert. 5 targets. In the pass game, 95 yards and a touchdown. With the injuries the 49ers have to Kittle, that's going to keep Mostert involved in the passing game. With the injuries the Jets have and the fact that they're the Jets, that means Mostert's going to run the ball today. You're going to see a big win out of the 49ers, and you're likely going to see a lot of that coming from Raheem Mostert. And number 1 is Jonathan Taylor for the Colts. Your top running back sit this week is Leonard Fournette for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus Carolina. Well, this might be an obvious one, but last week, Fournette was only on the field for 9 snaps, firmly behind Ronald Jones and Shady McCoy. Now, I think you can expect Fournette to see his workload increase as the season goes on, but for now, keep him on your bench. Carolina allowed plenty of rushing yards, and if Ronald Jones gets off to a hot start, I doubt you're going to see him exiting the game today. The rest of your top 5 running back sits, starting with number 5, DeAndre Swift at Green Bay. Swift will work his way into the lineup eventually, but last week just 7 rush attempts. Did have 5 targets, did see some goal line work, some promising things out of Swift, but you've still got a muddled backfield there with Peterson and Kerryon Johnson. Swift will have his time, but for now, just keep an eye on it. Similar story at number 4, Cam Akers at the Eagles. Last week, 20 fewer snaps than Malcolm Brown for Cam Akers. And he also ceded the goal line work to Brown. Although he was named the starter, this is a player just to keep an eye on for now if you have him on your roster and expect his workload to increase. Number 3 is Frank Gore for the New York Jets against the 49ers. In 2019, San Francisco allowed the third fewest fantasy points to the running back position. And he plays for the New York Jets. Sorry, Jets fans. Your number 2 sit is Jordan Howard. Where was Jordan Howard last week? The last 10 games, Buffalo has allowed just 4 touchdowns to running backs. If anything, this is a passing game for Miami. So Jordan Howard is on your bench. We're about 12 minutes from game time, everybody. We got one more set to go through here, and it is the tight end starts and sits for week 2. Your top tight end start is Jared Cook from the New Orleans Saints, playing at the Las Vegas Raiders, who last season allowed the 8th most fantasy points to the tight end position. Last week, 7 targets against the Bucs, and now without Michael Thomas, you would expect Cook to continue to see a high volume, and for Jared Cook, it's a revenge game against the Raiders. The rest of your tight end starts. Number 5, Evan Ingram at the Bears. In 2019, Chicago allowed the 9th most fantasy points to the tight end position. Last week, 7 targets for Ingram. Did not do much with them. You never know what you're going to get from Evan Ingram, but if you need a tight end this week, hey, let's give it a shot. Perhaps a better option at number 4 is Logan Thomas for Washington, playing at Arizona, who last season allowed the most fantasy points to the tight end position. Last week, Thomas led the team with 8 targets. This is a new name, and every year we see some players break out at this position, and I think Logan Thomas has certainly the chance to be one of those players this year. Your third start is Hunter Henry for the Chargers versus the Kansas City Chiefs, who last season allowed the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end position. Last week, Henry led his team with 73 yards. This is a good spot for Hunter Henry. Number 2 is Darren Waller versus the New Orleans Saints. The Raiders are a little bit banged up in their receiver core. Darren Waller, always a favorite target of Derek Carr. That makes this a tight end shootout game with Jared Cook. Cook, as we said, the Raiders last season allowed the 8th most fantasy points to the tight ends. Michael Thomas is out, so he should see a high volume, and it's a revenge game for Jared Cook. Should be a very good spot. All right, that's all your starts and sits. Let's take another quick look back at the actives and inactives in case anybody needs to be filled in. We're a little bit less than 10 minutes to game time. I surely hope my lineups are set because I didn't have a chance to look at them before the show today. But let's take a look at the actives and inactives one more time. We'll go through them a little quicker. This game starting with the Giants at the Bears. Golden Tate not on the list this week. So if you need Tate in the wide receiver spot, which I'm pretty sure I do in one of my leagues, he is not on the list. For Chicago, nobody else of consequence for the Giants, by the way. And nobody for Chicago as well. So that means Trubisky at the quarterback spot. Perhaps a big game for Allen Robinson. Tariq Cohen just got paid. We'll see if that makes a big difference. Atlanta at Dallas. Start everybody. Nobody on the list for Atlanta. And for Dallas, nobody on the list of consequence either. This is going to be a shootout. Detroit at Green Bay. Kerryon Johnson, of course, still out for the Lions. I'm sorry, not Kerryon Johnson. Kenny Golladay. Similar initials, not quite the same. Nobody else of consequence for the Lions. Green Bay, nothing to see here. Jacksonville at Tennessee. Got D.D. Westbrook for Jacksonville. Nobody else really mentioned. We'll see what Gardner Minshew can do today. And Tennessee, of course, Marlon Mack. We spoke about Jonathan Taylor in his spot. No, that's not Tennessee. That's Indianapolis. I'll figure this thing out someday. Tennessee is A.J. Brown missing. Nobody else to note fantasy-wise. The next game is Indianapolis. That's Minnesota. Nobody on the Minnesota side. And Indianapolis, as we may have just mentioned, Marlon Mack lost Jonathan Taylor in. Jack Doyle inactive today from the tight end spot. Nobody else of fantasy relevance. Buffalo and Miami. Buffalo Bills, nobody to mention. Miami Dolphins, Devontae Parker is active. And no other inactives showing. San Francisco at the Jets. San Francisco, you have no George Kittle. If you have George Kittle in your lineup, you've got about 5 minutes to get him out of there. He will not be playing today. He will not be scoring any points. Although he's pretty good. He might still find a way. No other names of consequence on that list. New York Jets, no Jamison Crowder. No Le'Veon Bell. I've been mean enough to the Jets so far today. I'm not going to say anything more about that game. Next game, LA Rams in Philadelphia. Nobody listed on the Rams. Philadelphia without Alshon Jeffrey. I think you can expect that for a while. But active is Jalen Reagor. This will be an interesting game. I'm concerned with the protection for Carson Wentz. Denver and Pittsburgh. Denver is without Phillip Lindsay. No other names of consequence on that list. So that does mean Cortland Sutton is active for the Broncos. May not have mentioned him last time through. And for Pittsburgh, no names of consequence, although we're all watching what happens with James Conner and Benny Snell. And Carolina and Tampa Bay. Nobody on the Carolina side. Chris Godwin, concussion protocol for Tampa Bay. Nobody else mentioned there. That is the last of the 1 p.m. games. We are right around 2 minutes or so left to kick off. We'll give you the rest of the later games. We don't have, obviously, actives and inactives on those, so keep your eyeballs open. Washington at Arizona, Kansas City at the Chargers, and Baltimore at Houston. Those are our 3 4 p.m. starts on the East Coast. Night game is New England at Seattle, and tomorrow night, New Orleans at Las Vegas. Obviously, we know Michael Thomas is not playing in that game. And next week, we promise our graphics will be back for the actives and inactives, so you don't have to just sit here and look at me for the entire time we go through these. So we will have our normal graphics back. But other than that, we hope you enjoyed the show. Let's see if we got some comments here to go through. We do have a couple. Let's see if we can put these up on the screen. From Darren Hopkins. Thank you, Darren. Fuller or Sutton? Will Fuller today playing at 4:25 against the Ravens. Cortland Sutton against Pittsburgh. This is a tough one. I think I would have to go with Will Fuller just simply because of the fact that we don't know exactly what Sutton is going to have health-wise. Even during the week, they were talking about this could be a game-time decision. So I think I would go with Fuller. I think Houston is probably going to have to throw the ball. I think Baltimore will be winning that game. So I would go with Will Fuller in that case. From TS, Deontay Johnson or CeeDee Lamb PPR? That is a close one. I can see why you guys have these questions. I like CeeDee Lamb. I like Deontay Johnson. I will be starting them both in different leagues today. Now, if I had to guess which team is going to be in a better spot game script-wise, I mean, Deontay Johnson playing Denver, probably the tougher defense than Atlanta. That might make a decision. I think both are good starts. I would probably go with Lamb. From KJW Watkinson, Devontae Parker, this is a choose two. Devontae Parker, Mike Williams, Chris Carson, Devin Singletary, Mike Williams. I'm not going to choose him twice. And Miles Sanders is the other one. All right, let's take a look. We're going to choose two. Not Devontae Parker, not Devin Singletary. I like Chris Carson. And Philadelphia is a mystery to me right now because I think the protection is just, I couldn't tell you what to expect there. I definitely like Carson, and process of elimination, it's between Sanders and Williams. Chargers playing at home against Kansas City. Philadelphia at home against the Rams. You drafted Miles Sanders to be great. You play him. He's in the lineup. You play him. It's so out of those, it's Sanders and Carson as your players. And let us know what you think. Leave your comments below. Let us know how we did, what you like, what you didn't like. Give us your opinions, good or bad. We want to know. We want you to be a part of these shows every week. Join us next week. Let's get our times up here on the screen so we can let you all know. Every Sunday. I don't know. I got to get rid of this comment. There we go. Every Sunday, 12 noon is a Sunday pregame show, TFF Live. We thank you for watching with us today. We'll see you again next week. And don't forget, here's where you can find us on YouTube. Subscribe now. Click the notifications. On Twitter, @TheFantasyFollow. And don't forget, on Twitter, you can submit your lineup questions during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we'll use them on the air. Check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/TheFantasyFollow, and our website, TheFantasyFollow.com. If you were with us live, thank you for being with us. We hope to see you next week. If you watch us on a replay and you liked our show, be sure to catch us next week, 12 noon every Sunday, taking you right up to game time. It's TFF Live. Good luck in fantasy. We'll see you next week.